The train whistle pierced the autumn air of 1875 as it pulled into Downieville, California, the wheels screeching to a halt against the iron tracks. Clara Jenkins stood alone on the wooden platform, her face half hidden behind a worn shawl, eyes downcast, fingers clutching a small valise containing everything she owned in the world. The station master checked his pocket watch, scanned the now empty platform, and frowned at the silent young woman who had not spoken a single word since stepping off the train. Not a soul had come to claim her. Patrick Wyatt noticed her immediately. He'd been leaning against the hitching post outside the station for nearly 2 hours, his weathered Stetson pulled low against the afternoon sun. At 26, he'd spent more years than he cared to count working cattle, riding the range and sleeping under stars that seemed to grow more distant with each passing season. Something about the woman's posture, lonely yet dignified, struck him in a way he couldn't explain. He approached slowly, boots crunching on the gravel, careful not to startle her. The station master was locking up, clearly annoyed at her lingering presence. "Miss," Patrick said, removing his hat, "seems nobody's come for you." Clara's eyes, green as spring grass, finally lifted to meet his. Within them, Patrick saw a universe of unspoken words. "I've been waiting for you," he continued, the words surprising even himself. "The Franklin place needs a housekeeper, and Mrs. Miller in town told me someone might be arriving on today's train. That you?" It wasn't true. He'd come to meet nobody. Had simply been killing time before heading back to his small ranch outside town. Yet something told him this woman needed saving, and Patrick Wyatt had never been one to ignore such instincts. Clara studied him carefully, her face expressionless. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "I'm Patrick Wyatt," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I've got my wagon just around the corner. We can get you settled before nightfall." She didn't take his hand, but she did pick up her valise and gestured for him to lead the way. As they walked, Patrick wondered what circumstances had brought this silent woman to Downieville, and why he'd felt compelled to rescue her from abandonment. He didn't know then that his impulsive kindness would change both their lives forever. Clara followed the tall cowboy to a weathered wagon hitched to 2 bay horses. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but outwardly she maintained her composure. 6 months of silence had taught her to hide her emotions well. She'd learned that lesson on the day her family's ranch burned to the ground in Colorado, taking her parents and her voice with it. The doctor had called it shock-induced mutism. Clara called it survival. Words couldn't describe what she'd seen anyway, and silence was safer. The cousin who'd written offering her a home in California had clearly changed his mind. No matter. She'd adapt. She always did. Patrick helped her onto the wagon seat, careful not to touch her more than necessary. He couldn't help noticing the quality of her clothing beneath the travel dust, simple but well made, suggesting she hadn't always lived in hardship. "Not much of a talker, are you?" he observed as they pulled away from the station. When she didn't respond, he nodded thoughtfully. "That's all right. Sometimes words just get in the way." The late afternoon sun painted the Sierra foothills gold as they traveled the rutted road out of town. Downieville sat nestled in a canyon where the Yuba River's North Fork met the Downey River, surrounded by mountains still bearing the scars of the gold rush that had established the town nearly 25 years earlier. "Town smaller than it was during the gold days," Patrick explained, filling the silence with words as they passed the courthouse and a row of false-fronted businesses. "But it's still the county seat. Lively enough." Clara watched the town recede, wondering what she'd do when they reached their destination, and this stranger discovered his lie. She had no reference letter, no proof she could manage household duties at this Franklin place he'd mentioned. After a mile, Patrick steered the wagon onto a narrow track that wound through a stand of ponderosa pines. "My place isn't much," he said. 60 acres, small cabin, few head of cattle. I do odd jobs in town too, carpentry mostly." He glanced at her. "Truth is, there is no Franklin place. I just couldn't leave you standing there with night coming on and nowhere to go." Clara's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with alarm. Patrick raised his free hand. "No cause for worry. There's a lean-to off the main cabin, my workshop, clean with its own entrance. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow I'll take you wherever you want to go." He paused. "Or help you find proper work if that's what you need." Clara studied his profile, the straight nose, strong jaw darkened with stubble, eyes the color of coffee. Nothing in his manner suggested threat. After a moment's consideration, she nodded again. Relief washed over Patrick's features. "Good. That's good." The cabin appeared around the next bend, a sturdy one-room structure with a stone chimney, a covered porch, and the promised lean-to addition. A corral held 3 horses, and beyond that stretched a small pasture where a dozen cattle grazed. Not prosperous by any measure, but neat and well-maintained. "Home sweet home," Patrick murmured, reining in the horses. As Clara stepped down from the wagon, a large brown and white dog bounded from beneath the porch, barking enthusiastically. "That's Buck," Patrick said. "He sounds fierce, but he's friendly as they come." The dog circled Clara, sniffing curiously, then sat at her feet, tongue lolling. Hesitantly, she reached out to touch his head. The simple warmth of the animal brought unexpected comfort. Patrick unhitched the horses while Clara followed Buck to the porch. The mountain air carried a chill as evening approached, and she pulled her shawl tighter. "Let me show you where you'll stay," Patrick said, carrying her valise toward the lean-to. "It's not fancy, but it's clean." The workshop was indeed clean, with a narrow cot against one wall, a small table with a kerosene lamp, and shelves lined with woodworking tools. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the cot. "Stove in the main cabin," Patrick explained. "I'll heat water for washing, and we can have supper after I tend to the animals." Clara looked around the simple space, then met Patrick's eyes. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small notepad and pencil, her means of communication since the fire. She wrote quickly, then held up the page. "Thank you, I can pay." Patrick shook his head. "No need, just rest. I'll knock when supper's ready." After he left, Clara sank onto the cot, exhaustion washing over her. Despite her wariness, she felt safer than she had in months. Perhaps it was the mountain air, so similar to her Colorado home, or perhaps it was the unexpected kindness of this stranger. Either way, sleep claimed her almost immediately. When she awoke, darkness had fallen. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Clara smoothed her hair and straightened her travel-wrinkled dress before opening it. Patrick stood there, lamp in hand. "Supper's ready if you're hungry." The main cabin was simply furnished but comfortable, a plank table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and a curtained-off area she assumed contained his bed. The smell of coffee and beans filled the warm air. "Nothing fancy," Patrick apologized, setting out tin plates of beans, bacon, and cornbread. "Bachelor cooking," Clara wrote on her pad. "Looks wonderful, thank you." They ate in companionable silence. When Patrick wasn't looking, Clara studied him. Despite his lean frame, she could see the strength in his shoulders, the capability in his hands. His movements were economical, deliberate. No wasted motion. After they'd eaten, Clara insisted on washing the dishes, writing, "Least I can do." Patrick didn't argue. While she worked at the wash basin, he brought out paper and a pencil of his own. When she finished, he handed her a crude map. "Drew this for you. Shows Downieville and the surrounding area. Tomorrow I can take you wherever you need to go." Clara traced the lines with her finger, then wrote, "I have nowhere to go, was supposed to stay with cousin, but he didn't come." Patrick frowned. "You have the address. Maybe there was a misunderstanding." She wrote the name and address. Ethan Jenkins. Patrick's expression darkened. "Miss, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Ethan Jenkins left Downieville 3 weeks ago, sold his claim and moved on. Nobody knows where." Clara's face remained impassive, but her shoulders slumped slightly. She wrote, "I see. Thank you for telling me." "You're welcome to stay here while you figure things out," Patrick said carefully. "The workshop's yours as long as you need it. I could use help around the place if you're willing, in exchange for room and board." Clara considered the offer. She had little money, no connections, and no voice to explain her situation to potential employers. She wrote, "I can cook, clean, mend, but I don't speak. Haven't since fire took my family, 6 months ago." Patrick read her words, his expression softening. "I'm sorry about your family." "And your voice, doctors say, if it might come back." She shrugged, then wrote, "Maybe, maybe not." "Well, I don't need much conversation," Patrick said. "Just someone to help with the place while I work the cattle and do carpentry jobs in town. Would that suit you?" Clara nodded, relief washing over her face. "Good," Patrick said. "We'll work out the details tomorrow. For now, get some rest." As Clara returned to the workshop, she wondered about the strange turn her life had taken. She'd arrived in Downieville expecting a fresh start with family, only to find herself accepting charity from a cowboy stranger. Yet something about Patrick Wyatt's steady presence calmed the constant anxiety she'd carried since the night of the fire. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without fear. The next morning, Clara woke to birdsong and the smell of coffee. She washed quickly using the basin of water Patrick had left outside her door, changed into her second dress, and pinned up her chestnut hair. In the 6 months since the fire, she'd grown accustomed to making herself presentable with minimal means. When she stepped outside, she found Patrick chopping wood, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Morning," he called. "Coffee's hot inside. Help yourself." The kitchen was tidy, with a pot of coffee on the stove and a small loaf of bread on the table. Clara poured herself a cup, savoring the strong brew. She noticed a stack of mending in a basket by the rocking chair, shirts with torn sleeves, pants with worn knees. Taking out her notepad, she wrote a message and left it propped against the coffee pot, going to explore the property. "We'll start mending clothes after." Outside, Buck joined her as she walked the boundaries of Patrick's land. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The small ranch sat in a natural clearing surrounded by forest, with a creek running along one edge. Beyond the corral and cattle pasture, she discovered a kitchen garden, neglected but salvageable, and a chicken coop housing half a dozen hens. Clara found herself assessing the place with a homemaker's eye, noting repairs needed on the fence, weeds to be pulled in the garden, opportunities to make the cabin more comfortable. For so long, she'd focused only on survival. Now, unexpectedly, she felt a spark of purpose. When she returned to the cabin, Patrick was inside, washing up for the day. "Found everything all right?" he asked. She nodded, then wrote, "Garden needs work. I can fix it." "Be grateful if you would," he admitted. "Never had much luck with growing things, better with wood and cattle." Clara hesitated, then wrote, "Need to go to town, buy a few things." Patrick nodded. "I'm heading in myself after noon, need to pick up supplies and check on a job. We can go together." They spent the morning working separately, Patrick mending a section of corral fence, Clara sorting through the garden, making mental notes of what could be salvaged and what needed planting. She also gathered eggs from the chicken coop and swept out the cabin. The physical work felt good after days of sitting on trains. At noon, they ate a simple meal of bread and cheese before hitching the wagon for town. As they traveled, Patrick pointed out landmarks: a neighbor's ranch, the best fishing spot on the creek, the trail that led to higher pastures. "Been here 5 years now," he explained. "Came west after the war looking for something different." Clara's pencil scratched on paper. "You fought," Patrick nodded, eyes on the road. "Union Army. Enlisted at 18. Saw things no man should see." He fell silent for a moment, then added, "Guess we both carry ghosts." The simple acknowledgement of their shared trauma touched Clara deeply. She reached over and briefly squeezed his arm, her first intentional contact with another person in months. Downieville appeared busier than it had the previous evening. Wagons lined the main street, and miners mixed with shopkeepers and townspeople along the boardwalks. Patrick helped Clara down from the wagon. "General Store's there," he said, pointing. "I need to see about a job at the assayer's office. They need new shelving." "Meet you back here in an hour," Clara nodded, clutching her small purse containing the little money she had left from selling her parents' belongings. The general store proved well stocked, and the proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, was patient as she wrote her requests on paper. She purchased needles, thread, fabric for dish towels, seeds for the garden, and a small tin of small luxuries that would make life more comfortable. As she browsed, she overheard 2 women talking near the dry goods. That poor Wyatt man, living all alone out there since Sarah died. 3 years now, isn't it? Such a tragedy, losing her in childbirth like that. The baby too. He was never the same after. Keeps to himself mostly. Does good work though. Built my Henry's desk last winter. Clara moved away, their words echoing in her mind. So Patrick had been married, had nearly been a father. This explained something about the sadness she occasionally glimpsed in his eyes, the careful distance he maintained. When she met him at the wagon an hour later, she saw him with new understanding. They were both survivors of unimaginable loss. Perhaps that was why he'd approached her at the station, one wounded soul recognizing another. The ride back to the cabin was quiet, but comfortably so. As they crested the final hill, the small ranch came into view, golden in the late afternoon sun. Clara was surprised to realize it already felt familiar, almost like home. "You bought seeds," Patrick observed, noticing her packages. "Planning to stay a while then?" Clara nodded, then wrote, "If that's all right." Patrick's smile was small but genuine. "More than all right, Miss Jenkins." That evening established a pattern that would continue in the days that followed. They worked separately during the day, Patrick with his cattle or carpentry, Clara transforming the neglected cabin and garden. In the evenings, they shared simple meals, and occasionally, Clara would write brief notes about her day or ask questions about the property. A week passed, then 2. October deepened, bringing cooler nights and changing leaves. Clara planted her seeds, mended Patrick's clothes, and thoroughly cleaned the cabin. She baked bread in the mornings and learned to make stew from the game Patrick occasionally brought home. Without discussing it, they fell into a comfortable routine that suited them both. Patrick noticed the changes in his home with quiet appreciation. Fresh curtains appeared at the windows, made from fabric Clara had purchased in town. The garden rows stood neat and promising. His mended shirts fit better than they had in years. More subtly, he noticed changes in Clara herself. Her face had softened, the perpetual wariness giving way to occasional smiles. She moved about the property with increasing confidence, and her notes became longer, more descriptive. Though she remained silent, she communicated in 1,000 other ways through gesture, expression, and the careful attention she paid to their shared spaces. Patrick found himself looking forward to evenings by the fire, when Clara would sometimes write stories of her childhood in Colorado or ask about his experiences in California. He told her about coming west after the war, working cattle drives, saving to buy his small ranch. He spoke of the town's history as a gold rush boomtown, now settling into a more sustainable existence. He did not speak of Sarah, and Clara did not ask. The women's conversation at the general store had told her enough. She understood loss too well to probe his. One evening in late October, as wind rattled the cabin windows, Patrick worked at his carpentry bench in the main room while Clara mended by the fire. The domestic scene struck him suddenly how natural it felt to share this space, this life. How the cabin had transformed from merely a place to sleep into something that felt like a home again. Clara glanced up, catching his contemplative gaze. She tilted her head in question. "Just thinking," he said, returning to the chair leg he was carving. "Been nice, having you here." She smiled, the firelight catching the amber highlights in her hair. From her pocket she withdrew her ever-present notepad and wrote, "Been nice being here." That night, Patrick lay awake behind his bedroom curtain, listening to the wind and thinking about the strange circumstances that had brought Clara Jenkins into his life. He'd acted on impulse that day at the station, something he rarely did. Now he couldn't imagine the cabin without her quiet presence. He reminded himself that their arrangement was temporary. Eventually, she would want more than this isolated existence with a widowed rancher. She was young, 22, she'd written when he asked, and despite her trauma, she had a lifetime ahead of her. When spring came, she would likely move on. The thought left him emptier than he cared to admit. In her cot in the workshop, Clara too lay awake. The past weeks had brought a peace she hadn't thought possible after the fire. Patrick asked nothing of her beyond the work she was glad to do. He accepted her silence, never pressuring her to explain or recover. In his presence, she felt the knot of anxiety in her chest slowly loosening. Yet she sensed his careful distance, the boundary he maintained. He was unfailingly kind but guarded. The women in town had mentioned a wife named Sarah, dead 3 years. Clara wondered if his heart was still buried with her. November arrived with the first dusting of snow and the promise of a hard winter ahead. Patrick spent days ensuring the cabin and outbuildings were weatherproof, the woodpile stocked, and hay stored for the animals. Clara preserved the last of the garden harvest, dried herbs from the kitchen garden, and sewed warm linings for Patrick's work gloves. They made a trip to town for winter supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, kerosene, ammunition. While Patrick negotiated with the blacksmith for horseshoes, Clara visited the small lending library attached to the assayer's office. The librarian, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Parker, helped her select several books to see them through the winter evenings. "You're staying out at the Wyatt place, I hear," Mrs. Parker said as she recorded the loans. Clara nodded. Good for Patrick. Been alone too long since his tragedy. She patted Clara's hand. "You don't need to speak for us to see you've been good for him. He's looking more like his old self these days." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the implication, but couldn't deny the pleasure the woman's words brought. She wrote a note. "We're just neighbors. I help with his home." Mrs. Parker smiled knowingly. "Of course, dear. Still, it's nice to see him with a friend." On the ride home, snow began falling in earnest, thick flakes that quickly covered the ground and muffled the wagon wheels. Patrick urged the horses to a faster pace. "Don't want to get caught in a real blow," he explained. "First snow usually doesn't stick, but better safe than sorry." By the time they reached the cabin, the snowfall had increased, driven by gusting wind. They hurried to unload supplies and settle the animals. Clara lit lamps and stoked the fire while Patrick made a final check of the outbuildings. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots. His face was tight with concern. "Storm's coming in harder than I thought. Might be snowed in for a few days." Clara didn't share his worry. The cabin was snug, they had ample supplies, and the prospect of snowbound days held a certain appeal. She wrote, "We'll be fine, I made stew." Patrick's expression relaxed into a smile. "You're right, we're prepared." He hung his coat by the door. "And your stew smells mighty good." They ate by lamplight as darkness fell early, the storm's intensity growing outside. After dinner, Clara brought out one of the books she'd borrowed, a collection of Mark Twain stories. To her surprise, Patrick asked if she'd read aloud. When she looked puzzled, he explained, "Not you exactly, but I could read to you. Been a while since I've had the chance to enjoy a good book." "Unless you'd rather read on your own." Clara shook her head and gestured for him to continue. They moved to the chairs by the fire, and Patrick began reading The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. His deep voice, with its slight Virginia drawl, brought the humorous tale to life. Clara found herself smiling, then silently laughing at the story's absurdities. When Patrick glanced up and caught her mirth-filled expression, something shifted in his eyes. For a moment, the careful distance between them seemed to diminish. "You have a beautiful smile," he said softly, then quickly returned to the book, as though embarrassed by the observation. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. She watched Patrick's profile as he read, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the gentle way he handled the book pages. A dangerous longing took root inside her. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. They remained companionably snowbound, each attending to indoor tasks, Clara baking bread and organizing the pantry shelves, Patrick working on a set of chairs commissioned by the hotel in town. In the afternoon, they ventured out to check on the animals, trudging through knee-deep snow, their breath clouding in the frigid air. "Never gets this cold in the Gold Country," Patrick remarked as they returned to the cabin, cheeks red from the biting wind. "Reminds me of winters back east." Clara nodded in understanding. Colorado winters had been similarly harsh. The familiar cold carried memories, both sweet and painful: sleigh rides with her father, her mother's special hot chocolate, the warmth of family gathered around the hearth. And then, the contrasting memory of standing in snow, watching flames consume everything she loved. Patrick noticed the shadow cross her face. "Bad memories," she shrugged, then nodded slightly. "The fire?" he asked gently. Another nod. She pulled out her notepad and wrote with trembling fingers. "It was winter, December. I was in town, came home to flames, couldn't save them." Patrick read her words, his expression solemn. "No wonder you don't speak. Some horrors steal all words." Clara looked up at him, struck by his perfect understanding. Impulsively, she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. "I know about ghosts," he said quietly. "After Sarah died, I didn't speak for nearly a month, just couldn't find words for the emptiness." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife directly. Clara squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue if he wished. "She was so excited about the baby," Patrick said, his voice low. "Had everything planned, names picked out, little clothes made. Then the fever took them both." He swallowed hard. "Doctor said it happened sometimes, nothing anyone could have done." Clara's heart ached for him. She released his hand to write. "I'm sorry, she must have been wonderful." "She was," Patrick agreed. "Kind, always laughing. We grew up together back in Virginia, came west after the war." He sighed. "After she died, I couldn't bear to leave this place she loved, but couldn't bear being here alone either, just existed." Clara wrote again. "Until," Patrick met her eyes directly. "Until a silent girl needed someone at the train station." The honest admission hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself since the fire. Patrick reached out and gently brushed one from her cheek. "We make quite a pair, don't we?" he said, his voice rough with emotion. Clara nodded, managing a watery smile. She wrote, "Broken but still standing." "Yes," Patrick agreed, "still standing." That evening, as they sat by the fire reading again, Clara felt something shift within her, loosening, as though frozen parts of her heart were beginning to thaw. Patrick's shared grief created a bridge between them, connecting their separate islands of loss. The storm abated overnight, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white. In the days that followed, they established a winter routine, Patrick clearing paths to the outbuildings and caring for the animals, Clara maintaining the cabin and preparing meals. The snow kept them more isolated than usual, with trips to town becoming difficult and infrequent. December arrived, bringing Christmas preparations. Clara secretly worked on gifts for Patrick when he was outside: a new scarf knitted from wool she'd purchased in town, leather gloves she'd lined with rabbit fur from his hunting. Patrick, she noticed, disappeared into his workshop more frequently, claiming projects for neighbors. One evening 2 weeks before Christmas, Clara was kneading dough when a strange sound escaped her throat, a small, involuntary hum. She froze, hands deep in flour. It was the first sound she'd made in more than 8 months. Patrick looked up from the table where he was cleaning his rifle. "Clara." She met his gaze, wide-eyed, and pointed to her throat. "You made a sound," he said, understanding immediately. "That's wonderful." She nodded, emotion welling up. She abandoned the dough to write. "It just happened, wasn't trying." "Maybe your voice is finding its way back," Patrick suggested gently. "No hurry. It'll come when it's ready." His casual acceptance moved her deeply. Any other man might have pressed her to try again, to force progress. Patrick simply acknowledged the moment's significance and gave her space to process it. That night, alone in her workshop bed, Clara tried again, a soft hum, barely audible. Her throat felt rusty, unused but not painful. She wondered if Patrick was right, if her voice might be finding its way back, because she finally felt safe. The realization that she associated safety with Patrick Wyatt's presence was both comforting and terrifying. Christmas approached with clear, cold days and star-filled nights. They cut a small pine tree from the forest edge and set it up in the cabin. Clara decorated it with pine cones, dried berries, and paper stars she'd cut from old newspaper. Patrick contributed carved wooden ornaments: a horse, a bird, a delicate snowflake. "Made these with Sarah that first Christmas," he admitted as he hung them. "Haven't had the heart to put them up since she died." Clara touched his arm in understanding, then wrote, "Thank you for sharing them. They're beautiful." On Christmas Eve, they exchanged their gifts by firelight. Clara was delighted with Patrick's offering a small writing desk he'd crafted for her workshop, complete with drawers for her paper and pencils. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the careful joinery and polished finish. "Thought you might like a proper place to write," he explained. "Your notes have become quite the stories lately." Clara presented her gifts, pleased when Patrick immediately wrapped the scarf around his neck and tried on the lined gloves. "These are fine work," he said, examining the tiny, even stitches. "Too fine for a cowboy's hands." Clara shook her head and wrote, "Perfect for your hands." The evening continued with a special supper: venison roast, potatoes, and apple pie Clara had made from preserved fruit. Patrick brought out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving and poured them each a small glass. "To new beginnings," he toasted. Clara raised her glass in agreement, then took a careful sip. The liquor burned pleasantly down her throat. On impulse, she cleared her throat and whispered, "Thank you." The words were barely audible, raspy from disuse, but unmistakable. Patrick's eyes widened. "Clara," he breathed. "Your voice." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. The two simple words had required enormous effort, but seeing Patrick's joy made it worthwhile. "Don't strain," he cautioned. "There's no rush." She nodded again, overwhelmed by the moment. Patrick reached across the table and took her hand. "Best Christmas gift I could have received," he said softly. Clara squeezed his fingers, hoping he could feel everything she couldn't yet say: her gratitude, her affection, her growing certainty that what she felt for him was far more than friendship. As Christmas passed and the new year of 1876 began, Clara's voice returned in fragments, a word here, a short phrase there. Each utterance required concentration, and by evening she was often too tired to try. But Patrick's patient encouragement bolstered her efforts. January brought heavy snows that isolated them further. They spent long evenings by the fire, Patrick reading aloud or telling stories of his childhood in Virginia, Clara occasionally contributing a raspy word or two. During the days they worked in companionable silence, Patrick at his carpentry, Clara with her mending and cooking. One stormy afternoon, as Patrick taught Clara to play checkers, Buck began barking urgently at the door. Patrick frowned, setting down a game piece. Someone's coming. Strange in this weather. He opened the door to find their nearest neighbor, Frank Miller, on the porch, covered in snow. "Thank God you're home, Wyatt," the man panted. "My Mary's time has come early, baby's breech, according to the midwife. Need to get the doctor from town, but my horse went lame. Can I borrow your gelding?" "Of course," Patrick said immediately. "I'll saddle him right now." Clara grabbed her coat and followed the men to the barn. While Patrick prepared his fastest horse, she scribbled a note and pressed it into Frank's hand. "Take these for Mary." She handed over packets of herbs she'd dried from her garden: raspberry leaf, chamomile, and willow bark. "The missus will be grateful," Frank said, pocketing the herbs. "She's been laboring since dawn." As the desperate man rode off into the storm, Patrick turned to Clara. "Poor Mary. Their first baby." Clara nodded, remembering what Patrick had shared about losing Sarah in childbirth. The worry in his eyes told her his thoughts ran along similar lines. That evening they waited anxiously for news. When hoofbeats finally approached near midnight, Patrick rushed to the door. Dr. Harrison, the town physician, stumbled in, half frozen. "Got there in time," he reported as Clara helped him remove his ice-encrusted coat. "Mother and daughter doing well thanks to quick action." He nodded at Clara. "Miller said you sent herbs that helped ease the pain. You have healing knowledge," Clara nodded. "Mother taught," she whispered, the words coming easier in the moment's urgency. "Good woman," the doctor approved. "Need more like you in these parts." He accepted the coffee Patrick offered. "Can't stay long. Need to get back to check on them by morning. Just wanted to let you know the outcome since your horse made it possible." "You're welcome to rest here before heading back," Patrick offered. The doctor shook his head. "Best to keep moving. Storm's letting up a bit." After he departed, Clara and Patrick sat by the fire, relief evident in both their faces. "Life and death always so close together out here," Patrick observed quietly. "Yes," Clara agreed, her voice less strained than usual. "But life won today." Patrick looked at her with such tenderness that Clara felt her heart might burst. "Yes," he echoed, "life won today." In that moment of shared relief, with the fire crackling and snow falling gently outside, something changed between them. The careful distance Patrick had maintained since her arrival seemed to dissolve. When Clara rose to prepare for bed, he caught her hand. "Clara," he said softly, "I'm glad you're here, not just as my housekeeper, as—" he hesitated, searching for words, "as friend." Clara suggested, her voice still rough but stronger than before. Yes, Patrick said, and maybe. He didn't finish the thought, but the way he looked at her spoke volumes. Clara squeezed his hand, then whispered, maybe. It was enough for now, this acknowledgement of possibilities, of feelings growing too strong to ignore. The weeks that followed brought subtle changes to their relationship. Patrick's hand occasionally lingered when passing Clara a dish at dinner. Clara found reasons to work near him when he was at his carpentry bench. Their evening conversations grew longer, more personal, as Clara's voice strengthened with use. In February, they made a trip to town for supplies, their first in nearly a month. As they walked together down Downieville's Main Street, Clara noticed the glances and whispers that followed them. The station master did a double take, seeing her walking comfortably at Patrick's side. Mrs. Parker from the library beamed approvingly when they returned books together. "Town's talking," Patrick noted wryly as they loaded purchases into the wagon, "wondering about us." "Let them talk," Clara said, her voice still soft but clear. Patrick smiled at her newfound assertiveness. "Doesn't bother you. Their speculation," Clara shook her head. "They mean well." She hesitated, then added, "What are we, Patrick?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. He secured a flour sack before answering. "What do you want us to be?" "More than employer and housekeeper," she replied honestly. "More than friends." Patrick's expression softened. "I want that too. Have for months." He took her gloved hand. "But I've been afraid. For you, you came here wounded, needing safety, didn't want to take advantage." "You didn't," Clara assured him. "You gave me space to heal, time to find my voice again." She stepped closer. "I know my own mind, Patrick Wyatt." Their first kiss happened there, beside the wagon in Downieville's Main Street, witnessed by several curious townsfolk. It was brief, gentle, but filled with promise. When they parted, Patrick's eyes shone with a light Clara hadn't seen before. "Well," he said, a smile tugging at his lips, "guess that settles what the town will be talking about now." Clara laughed, a sound so unexpected and joyous that Patrick stared in wonder. "Let them talk," she repeated, her voice stronger than ever. The ride home was filled with shared glances and tentative touches, the brush of fingertips, a hand on a knee. They spoke little, both processing the shift in their relationship. But when Patrick helped Clara down from the wagon at the cabin, he pulled her into his arms for a second, deeper kiss that left them both breathless. "I've wanted to do that since Christmas," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Clara asked, her hands resting on his chest. "Wasn't sure you were ready." "Or if I was." Patrick pressed his forehead to hers. "Loving someone means risking loss, Clara. Wasn't sure I could bear that again." "I understand," she whispered. "I've been afraid too, but living in fear is no life at all." Patrick nodded, stroking her cheek. "When did you get so wise?" "Learned from a patient cowboy," she replied with a small smile. As February melted into March, their relationship deepened. They shared kisses by the fire, held hands during walks to check fence lines, spoke of future plans. Clara moved from the workshop into the cabin, though she maintained her own sleeping space behind a new curtain Patrick installed. They were cautious, respectful of boundaries, yet increasingly certain of their feelings. Clara's voice grew stronger daily, though she still spoke more softly than before her trauma. She began telling Patrick about her family, her father's ranch in Colorado, her mother's garden, the plans and dreams cut short by fire. Each shared memory helped heal the wounds of loss. In turn, Patrick spoke more freely of Sarah, not just her death, but her life, her laughter, the love they'd shared. Clara listened without jealousy, understanding that honoring Sarah's memory was part of loving Patrick fully. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching spring's first tentative appearance, Patrick took Clara's hand. "Been thinking," he said. "About us, About the future. Clara turned to him, heart quickening. What about it? I love you, he said simply. Have for months now. Maybe since that first day at the station. Something in your eyes called to me, Clara's breath caught. Though they'd shown their feelings in countless ways, neither had spoken the words aloud. I love you too, she replied, her voice clear and certain. Patrick squeezed her hand. I know it hasn't been long, not even a year since you arrived, but I can't imagine my life without you now. This place wasn't a home until you came. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it, as my wife. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Are you certain? More certain than I've ever been of anything, Patrick assured her. You brought life back to this place, to me. Yes, Clara whispered, then louder. Yes, I'll marry you, Patrick Wyatt. The ring slid perfectly onto her finger. As Patrick gathered her into his arms, Clara marveled at life's unexpected turns, how the tragic loss of her family had ultimately led her to this moment, this man, this second chance at happiness. They were married in April in Downieville's small church. The town turned out in force, curious to witness the union of the quiet rancher and the once silent woman who'd arrived unclaimed at the train station 6 months earlier. Clara wore a cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Patrick stood tall in his best suit, hair trimmed, face clean-shaven, eyes never leaving his bride. When asked to speak her vows, Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. I, Clara Jenkins, take you, Patrick Wyatt, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward. At the celebration afterward, held at the town hotel, Mrs. Parker from the library clasped Clara's hands. My dear, when I saw you that day borrowing books, I just knew. You've brought that man back to life. The station master, slightly tipsy on punch, confessed. Never seen anything like it, how he just knew you were meant for him. Said those words, I've been waiting for you, like he really had been, all along. Patrick overheard and slipped an arm around Clara's waist. Maybe I had been, he said. Just didn't know it until I saw her standing there, looking lost but so determined. Not lost anymore, Clara said, leaning into his embrace. They returned to their cabin, their home, as husband and wife. The workshop was now fully Patrick's carpentry space again, with Clara's writing desk moved to a corner of the main room. They shared the bedroom behind the curtain, no longer separated by propriety or hesitation. In their marriage bed that night, Patrick loved Clara with gentle passion, whispering promises against her skin. Clara discovered that her body, like her voice, remembered how to express joy despite the trauma it had endured. Together they found a language beyond words of touch and taste, of giving and receiving, of complete trust. I never thought I'd find this again, Patrick murmured as they lay entwined afterward. This kind of happiness. Nor I, Clara agreed, resting her head on his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. After the fire, I thought my life was over, just ashes. From ashes, new growth, Patrick said, stroking her hair. That's what you are to me, Clara. New life from what I thought was finished forever. Spring bloomed fully across their land. Clara expanded the garden, planted flowers near the porch, and began keeping a journal of their days. Patrick's carpentry business thrived as word of his craftsmanship spread. Together they made plans to expand the cabin, add to their cattle herd, perhaps even hire help for the busier seasons. In June, Clara received a letter that changed everything again from a lawyer in Denver. Her parents' insurance policy, long thought lost in the fire, had been located. As their sole heir, Clara was entitled to a substantial sum. We could do anything, Patrick said when she showed him the letter. Buy more land, build a bigger house, move to a city if you wanted. Clara shook her head. This is our home, but the money could help us improve it. Maybe buy the Jenkins claim your neighbor mentioned is for sale. Expand our ranch. Patrick kissed her, amazed as always by her practical mind and generous heart. Whatever you want. I want our children to grow up here, Clara said softly, with room to run and mountains to explore. Patrick's eyes widened. Children, Clara took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. Child, coming around Christmas, the doctor thinks. Joy and fear warred in Patrick's expression. Clara, are you sure, after what happened to Sarah? I'm not Sarah, Clara said gently. And doctor? Harrison says I'm healthy and strong. We'll take every precaution. Patrick pulled her close, his emotions too powerful for words. Finally, he whispered, a baby, our baby. The beginning of our family, Clara agreed. Our future. The months that followed were busy with preparations, expanding the cabin to add a proper nursery, purchasing the neighboring land, hiring a young ranch hand to help with the heavier work. Patrick insisted Clara rest more, though she laughed at his overprotectiveness. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, she reminded him, often while working fields or tending other children. Not my wife, Patrick said firmly. Not with my child. Clara allowed him his concern, understanding the fears that drove it. As her body changed, growing round with their child, she sometimes caught Patrick watching her with a mixture of adoration and terror. On those nights she held him close, whispering assurances. We'll be fine, she promised. All of us. In December, as the first snows fell, Clara's time came. Patrick sent their ranch hand galloping for the doctor, while he helped Clara through the early stages of labor. Unlike Sarah's difficult delivery, Clara's proceeded normally, painful but progressing as it should. Dr. Harrison arrived in time to oversee the final hours. Patrick refused to leave the room despite the doctor's initial protests. I'm staying with my wife, he insisted, holding Clara's hand through each contraction. As dawn broke on December 20, 1876, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. Doctor. Harrison placed the red-faced, dark-haired infant on Clara's chest. A fine, healthy boy, he announced. Strong lungs on that one. Clara looked up at Patrick through exhausted, joyful tears. He's perfect. Patrick couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the miracle before him. He touched his son's tiny hand with a trembling finger, marveling when the infant gripped it firmly. What will you call him? The doctor asked as he finished tending to Clara. They had discussed names but waited to decide. Now, looking at their son's determined expression, Clara knew. Thomas, she said. After my father. Thomas Patrick Wyatt. Patrick nodded, emotion choking his voice. Thomas, he agreed when the doctor departed, satisfied that mother and child were doing well. Patrick stretched out beside Clara on their bed, his arm protective around her and their son. I've never been so scared, he admitted, or so happy. Worth every moment, Clara murmured, watching Thomas nurse at her breast. Patrick pressed a kiss to her forehead. You are the bravest person I've ever known, Clara Wyatt. From the moment I saw you standing alone at that station, not speaking but facing the world anyway. Not brave, Clara disagreed, just stubborn, unwilling to let grief win. That's what bravery is, Patrick said, continuing despite fear, like you taught me to do. As winter deepened outside, the small family remained snug in their expanded cabin. Thomas thrived, growing stronger daily. Patrick completed a cradle he'd been carving for months, decorated with intricate forest animals. Clara recovered her strength quickly, soon insisting on resuming light household duties while caring for their son. Neighbors visited, bringing gifts and good wishes. The town's interest in their story had only grown with the birth of their child. seeing it as the perfect completion to a romantic tale that had begun with a chance meeting at the train station. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Thomas sleeping in his cradle nearby, Clara asked, "Do you ever think about that day at the station?" Patrick nodded, taking her hand. "Often. How different life would be if I hadn't gone to town that afternoon, if I hadn't seen you standing there." "Why did you come to me?" Clara asked. "You never really explained." Patrick considered the question. "Something in your eyes," he said finally. "Sorrow, but also determination. I recognized it, saw myself in it." He paused. "And maybe some part of me knew even then." "Knew what?" "That you were my second chance," he said simply. "That we were meant to heal each other." Clara leaned against him, content in the life they had built from the ashes of separate tragedies. "When you said I've been waiting for you that day, did you mean it? Or was it just to help a stranded girl?" Patrick smiled, remembering. "I meant it, though I didn't understand why the words came to me. Now I know." He kissed her gently. "I had been waiting, my whole life, without knowing." Outside, snow fell softly on their expanded ranch, the house with its new rooms, the larger corral, the barn where they now kept a milk cow along with their horses. Inside, the fire crackled, illuminating the evidence of their shared life: Clara's writing desk covered with journal pages, Patrick's tools hanging neatly on the wall, Thomas's cradle with its carved animals standing guard over their sleeping son. From silence had come words. From loss had come finding. From separate griefs had come shared joy. "I love you," Clara whispered, her voice strong and clear, the voice she had found again through loving and being loved. "And I love you," Patrick answered, holding his family close as the winter night deepened around their mountain home. "Always."